Good morning and welcome to Sunday Supplement. These are unprecedented times for sport across the world. We'll be discussing how coronavirus has affected football and where the game goes from here. Have the right decisions been made by the right people at the right time? Will the 2019-20 season ever be completed in its entirety? And what are the potential ramifications, both financially and for the individuals involved? Also on the show, we'll discuss the manner of Liverpool's exit from a Champions League and Phil Neville's future as England women's manager. Joining us to discuss all of that is David Maddock, who's a Northern football correspondent of The Mirror, Martin Samuel, chief sports writer of The Mail, Alison Rudd, sports writer for The Times, and Rob Harris, global sports correspondent of Associated Press. And don't forget to tweet the show at Sunday Sup, and the best will appear at the bottom of your screen throughout the show. Now, as you can imagine, the newspapers this morning are just a teensy little bit lighter than usual, without all the usual football supplements and sports supplements, but there are still a lot of issues to be debated, of course, as you would expect. Actually, the Mail's gone with a big non-football story in issues with Tyson Fury. Very big exclusive story there. Euros off as the FA face a £20 million loss. And on the inside of the Mail, they're talking about the various options, 4 of them they put to us, about how and whether the Premier League, Football League, etc. seasons should be completed. Inevitably, it's not going to suit everybody. The Mirror have gutted Van Dijk of Liverpool, despair at the prospect of the fans missing the Premier League title party. They waited all this time. The Observer has a big piece by Jonathan Liew in there as the enormous industrial complex of global sport clanks to a terrifying halt. It's only natural to feel shocked, concussed, and even a touch bereft. So it's about how we feel about the fact there isn't so much live sport to watch. There still is a little bit, by the way. Rugby league, rugby union, some matches. Mexico's still going, by the way, with the football and elsewhere as well. Focus on non-league football this weekend, which has been played. Should it have been played? That's a question as well. A lot of non-league managers really unhappy about the fact that it's been going ahead. At the bottom here, they say exclusive winter Euros an idea to enable the Premier League to finish. Of course, the Euros are supposed to be in the summer. What on earth happens there? They're expected perhaps to be postponed. But of course, huge knock-on effects there. And in the Sunday Times, big column, new columnist Wayne Rooney is absolutely furious with the authorities and the government for the timing of their decisions, feels that it should have happened a lot earlier, and it shouldn't really have been Mikel Arteta, the Arsenal manager, contracting coronavirus to actually spark the end of the postponement of football. It is only postponement until April the 3rd. As things stand, so Rob, this is something that you've been beavering away with all week. Just go through for us the process of how we've reached this point.
I mean, it's been a week like no other, really. We've been told by the Prime Minister to prepare for much uncertainty in the weeks and months ahead, to prepare for the loss of loved ones. Society could be really closing down in part. And against the backdrop of that is what happens to the things we love, sport. So usually the distraction from everyday life, from the things that go wrong, from the gloom. Now even that is obviously gradually closing down. I mean, we couldn't really imagine at the start of the week we would end up perhaps in a position where the Premier League would be completely off. We thought maybe it would go behind closed doors first, but I think as the situation has escalated through the week, with the World Health Organization declaring this to be a pandemic, then them saying that Europe is at the epicentre, we've seen a really swift reaction from sports bodies, particularly in football. UEFA were determined still at the start of the week to try to press ahead with Euro 2020. It emerged then by Thursday that it really seems it can't take place and they're going to have to rearrange the tournament. It's going to be postponed, a huge decision. And then we've seen leagues gradually shut down as Italy and Spain and other countries and France have gone into lockdown themselves. And now we enter a time when we won't have sports there around us and there's no certainty when it will return. We're told by the Premier League at a minimum the start of April, but it looks very unlikely that we will be in a position, I think, to resume football then. And now is the waiting game all round.
A quote from Wayne Rooney in his column in The Times today. He says, "I know how I feel. If any of my family get infected through me because I've had to play when it's not safe and they get seriously ill, I'd have to think hard about ever playing again. I would never forgive the authorities." Do you understand that criticism?
I do understand, and there is so much uncertainty, and I think people who are making these decisions are almost as in the dark as we are. I was at Anfield on Wednesday night for the Madrid game, and there were more than 3,000 Atletico Madrid fans there, and yet they were banned from going into their own stadium in Spain, banned from travelling in Spain, and in fact, soon after Wednesday night, there were restrictions on any travel in Spain at all, and yet they were allowed to come over. After that game, I went home, turned on the TV, and there was Professor John Ashton, who was on Newsnight, and he said, and I'd literally just come in from that game, and he said there are thousands of Madrid fans in Liverpool, and I can guarantee this guy is the head of the Faculty of Public Health, or he was, and he said I can guarantee some will have the virus, and they are now spreading the virus in Liverpool. That's what this expert said, and I just got back from that game, and I could not believe that could have happened. The problem is, it's a situation that's obviously unprecedented, and even the people who are making decisions just simply don't have enough information, or didn't have enough information, and they acted slowly. Our government acted very slowly, and eventually it took Mikel Arteta and the Everton player and the Chelsea player to get the virus to make a unilateral decision, because the government themselves have still not said that sporting events can't go ahead. So, yeah, I understand exactly why Wayne Rooney feels like that. I felt like that when I got back from the game on Wednesday night. I was in a room full of Madrid journalists, full of them, and many were coughing. Martin was there too, and you almost get paranoid yourself. It was a really difficult situation.
I mean, the key thing is probably the fact actually the Premier League and others were just following government advice. So while the rest of Europe was putting sport behind closed doors, since the government was telling the Premier League and all the sports you could continue, then they went ahead with it. Obviously, until 9:30 on Thursday night, that was the position.
And the Spanish government advice was do not travel, do not play games. Because the British government that advice wasn't there, the Atletico Madrid fans were allowed to be in Liverpool. It was an insane situation.
You had the situation of Nuno, the Wolves manager, being absolutely fuming, even in his pre-match interview on Thursday night in Athens at Olympiacos, saying it's absurd we're playing this match. It was behind closed doors, and sure enough, the next day it got called off for now. But I spoke to various senior people at governing bodies yesterday who all said we were just following what the government was telling us. It wasn't up to us to jump the gun and to say we're cancelling football when the government's saying carry on, because they're being advised by the medical advisors. Where do you stand on that?
Well, Wayne Rooney also says in his column that he and his teammates were all watching TV, waiting for Boris Johnson to speak, which staggered me in a way. You don't sort of picture footballers tuning into political channels and wanting to know the latest news, but they were all waiting. They felt it would come from the very top at this country what their livelihoods were going to be for their families, for the fans, and everyone. And he says in his piece that they listen. They, Boris Johnson has bottled it. He's just left it to the football authorities to solve the issue. And they probably themselves felt the same way. Oh, now we have to start thinking about the way virus spreads and herd immunity and things, you know, when you're putting together the league system, you don't have to think about these things. That should come from scientists and government. It shouldn't have to come from the football authorities.
But Boris Johnson was only taking the advice of the people he was flanked by, which are very senior people, scientific chiefs, medical chiefs. Why would he jump the gun and say, I'm not listening to you?
A lack of lateral thinking. Because I know we're speaking from hindsight, but given what we'd already seen from around Europe, it just felt maybe the people involved in football and the general public and footballers and everybody involved would have just felt safer if there'd been something a bit more stringent and far-sighted rather than, well, it's up, you know, you can play football if you want to. You can have fans travelling in from abroad if you want to. It just felt a bit too relaxed for the times. And yet, in a way, when we look back, in years to come, when we look back, you know, the name Mikel Arteta will be a big name in history, because if he hadn't contracted the virus, then we might have waited another 4 days, 5 days, I don't know.
And Callum Hudson-Odoi, of course, at Chelsea as well. I mean, Martin, perhaps the government might say, or the authorities would say, there's more than one way to tackle this. And it's not so much that in this country we're being behind the curve of what they're doing correctly in Europe, more that their scientific evidence and their strategy is that they're trying to tackle it differently with the whole herd immunity situation and just trying to get a better outcome in a way that they see fit rather than actually just being behind.
Well, herd immunity is increasingly discredited as a way of dealing with this. Herd immunity works at like levels of 95%. If you're talking about 60% herd, they think will be successful as a herd immunity. If everyone gets it, then more people become immune. Then the disease can't travel the way it has done. If you're talking about 60% of the country getting it, you're still talking about 40,000 dead people. So, you know, if you want to buy into herd immunity, what you're doing is you're saying, well, we're prepared to lose 40,000 people to this disease, and then we'll, you know, we might have cracked it. Because the thing with herd immunity is nobody knows what the immunity to coronavirus is. They don't know. They think you can't get it. They think you can't get it, say, 2 weeks later, but they don't know that for certain. They don't know if it's going to be something where you're immune for life. They don't know whether it's something where you could get it next year. They don't know if the disease is going to mutate, and if the disease mutates, are you then vulnerable to it again? Because most diseases mutate. That's why you have a different strain of flu every year. So herd immunity and a lot of what is being talked about, it's just guesswork, and it's guesswork everywhere. And football always becomes this sort of the microcosm of society, and everything's seen through this prism of football. So the stadiums, what about the stadiums? As Dave said, the most dangerous place in Anfield the other night was not actually out in the open. The most dangerous place is in, say, the media section, is in any section where the two communities are now together in an enclosed space. So on the concourses, it's far more dangerous than actually out in the open air. That's why they were so worried about going behind closed doors and everyone piling into the pub, because the pub is a far more dangerous place in terms of the contracting coronavirus than a football stadium. But everyone's guessing. Everyone's guessing because they don't know how this disease travels. They don't know, you know, how long it travels. They know what you can get it from, and they know the symptoms, they know this and that, but they don't know the real specifics in terms of controlling it. So I can understand what Wayne is saying. I completely get what Wayne is saying. But sitting there expecting somebody to stand up and say, right, well, it's this, and this, we do this, and this, and then it's all sorted, but that's not going to happen. And that's not going to happen for months, maybe years. You
wrote about wanting games to be played behind closed doors earlier in the week.
Early in the week, and then the situation had changed, Jackie, within 12 hours, 24 hours. I mean, that piece that went in that day, the following day, by midday, it was out of date, because by midday the following day, when the clubs were coming in and saying, we've got players that have got it, behind closed doors only works if football didn't have coronavirus. Once football's got coronavirus, well, you can't play. That's how fast it's moving.
Yeah, because there's the theory that you look at Italy and go, well, they've closed down, we should do that, and that could be us in 2 weeks' time. But then the experts are suggesting that if you all do that, you just suppress it for a bit, and then you're bringing out this virus with so many desperately ill people after that, and then the NHS wouldn't be able to cope. So, I mean, there is science behind the strategy. It's easy for us as football journalists to go, oh, we should call football off, or they should do this. But they're not just making up decisions on the hoof, are they? There's a reason for what they're saying, scientifically.
Yeah, and they're also arguing that we might actually get bored, basically, by being isolating too soon and going into lockdown. But certainly, you know, Boris Johnson's turned the role of interviewer, actually, at times. He interviewed one of the medical experts himself in Downing Street on Wednesday, and she was making the point, actually, you don't really spread viruses in big open-air stadiums, but that position did contrast with what other key European countries were saying. You saw at PSG on Wednesday night, even though they played the game behind closed doors, you had thousands, it seemed, of PSG fans gathering outside, all on top of each other, celebrating that win over Dortmund. So that just shows the challenge of putting games behind closed doors. But the other point is actually it strains the resources of the emergency services as well and the public health authorities if you are continuing to play sport. And what we are being told is that the NHS is going to be overloaded in the coming weeks and months. We're not expecting this peak to happen maybe until May, even into June. So we've got many more weeks of escalating number of cases before we can even reach the peak. And then there won't be a very clear point, it seems, when we can say this is over or things are healthy to return to normal. There's not going to be a clear endpoint, a mission accomplished necessarily within coming months. There is no vaccine yet. It takes time to develop. And I know we're all trying to sort of sound like medical experts. We're just interpreting, obviously, what we're hearing from, across the world. But it is a period of uncertainty that it's very hard to determine the end game or, when necessarily there will be a sense of normality resuming, especially as we look ahead to things like the Olympics that is still due to take place in July.
The thing for me is that what appears to be clear is that most experts and most politicians are suggesting that up to 70% of populations are going to get this virus. And so clearly, if that's the case, then you need to slow the rate of transmission because none of us have to be experts to know that if everybody gets it at the same time, then the hospitals become overwhelmed, as has happened in Italy, and people are dying in Italy because there are too many people ill at the same time. So you have to slow it. And obviously, one of the ways of slowing it is by social distancing. That's clear. You were talking about PSG, and in France there was they played games behind closed doors, and yet Paris-Nice, the cycling race, was going on this week, and they started in Paris, obviously, and they went through the first stage was through the suburbs of Paris, where there was a major outbreak, and there were thousands and thousands of people out on the streets watching and at the finish line, and then they travelled down the whole length of France, and they finished on Saturday, when on Saturday the French government said no cinemas open, no shops open, no bars. They closed everything. And yet they'd allow this race with thousands of people travelling and thousands of people. So the governments are confused, but the bottom line is that if 70% of the population are going to get it, which appears to be the case, Angela Merkel came out and said that, then you need to slow it because you can't have all those people going into the health services ill at the same time because many more people will die.
And what they're trying to do, and the great fear is that, and people say, it doesn't matter, the economy doesn't matter because, lives are at stake and lives are at stake if the economy crashes because poverty kills. If you cannot afford shelter, if you cannot afford medicine, if your living conditions are substandard, poverty kills as surely as any virus. And what they are desperately trying to avoid is sending the West into an unprecedented global recession, which is why, if you're looking at places where you could get coronavirus, get on a London tube train at 5 o'clock in the evening or whatever, and you're there and the next person's there, and but they're not saying to people no public transport, no, because they're terrified that the economy falls off a cliff. Not just ours, but globally, America's economy. And America have bypassed. I can't believe this is true, but America appear to be fast-tracking a vaccine so quickly. They're sort of bypassing the rats stage. They're bypassing. It's going straight into testing on humans and stuff because they're desperately trying. That's how panicked everyone is.
OK, well, that's it for part one. But when we come back in part two in a moment, we'll continue the debate about the potential ramifications of this virus for fans, administrators and the individuals affected by the postponement of football. See you in a second.